The movie opens with an old man named Bud, who is severely ill and covered in boils. His daughter, Sarah, who is wearing a gas mask and gloves, assures him that everything will be fine and urges him to let go. Afterward, her husband, Paul, and their teenage son, Travis, both wearing masks and gloves, take Bud outside into the woods. And then suddenly, Travis tells his grandpa, "I love you," one last time before this happens. Paul shoots him to death. He places the body in a shallow grave and burns it with a heavy heart. The scene then cuts to the evening, where the family silently eats dinner while grieving for Bud. Afterward, Travis heads to the attic and listens in as his parents converse in their room. Sarah regrets that their son had to witness his grandpa's death, but Paul reassures her that he will be fine. Later, a depressed Travis approaches Bud's dog, Stanley, and assures him that he's going to take care of him. The teenager then falls asleep while looking at pictures of his grandpa. Around midnight, Travis suddenly wakes up and approaches a red door in the house. He opens it to head inside and notices his grandfather sitting on a bed. But the old man starts shrieking, and it turns out to be Travis's nightmare, and Sarah immediately says there's an intruder in their home. The family wears protective masks, and Paul heads toward the red door with a gun. Someone is trying to open the door from the other side. And as soon as he breaks it, Paul shoots in that direction. The intruder, who's also wearing a mask, stumbles backward, and Paul orders him to drop his weapons. Paul inspects his eyes and asks if he's sick, to which the latter says no. Despite this, Paul decides not to take any chances and knocks him out with his gun. He then inspects the surroundings of the house and notices that nobody else is around. Next, Paul and Travis drag the unconscious man outside and tie him to a tree. They seal his mouth with duct tape and leave him there. The family then fortifies their broken door and barricades the house to prevent anyone else from entering. Later, the intruder wakes up and lets out muffled cries for help, but no one comes to his aid. That night, Travis keeps hearing the distant cries and heads into the woods. He soon runs into the intruder and notices that he's staring at him with blackened eyes, but it was just another nightmare. He looks outside to see that the intruder is still tied to the tree. In the morning, Paul puts on a mask to inspect the man's condition. He realizes that a day has passed, but the man still appears healthy, which means he isn't infected. Paul then removes his mask and says he only wants honest answers, but won't hesitate to shoot if necessary. He eventually removes the duct tape from the intruder's mouth and asks why he barged into his house. The scared man admits that he only broke in because he assumed the place was abandoned. He has a wife and child, whom he left behind in search of water. They used to live at his late brother's house but were forced to flee to the woods when their water supply failed. Here, Paul asks if he knows what's going on out there, to which the intruder responds that he and his family got out as soon as the people in this city started getting sick. He also reveals that his family has food and even some livestock, which he is willing to trade for clean water. Upon hearing all of this, Paul gives the intruder some water to drink before deciding on his next move. By this point, it is clear that the movie takes place in a dystopian world, where societies have collapsed due to an unknown virus. Because of this, the family has been hiding in the woods to keep themselves isolated from the rest of the world. This is also the reason they had to kill the old man Bud, who was somehow infected with the virus. Back to the story, Sarah assumes that the intruder must have found them because of the smoke from when they burned Bud's body. She thinks they should give him a chance and bring his entire family here, since he knows where they live and can come back later. Paul is unsure whether to trust such a stranger, but Sarah insists that the more people they have, the better they can defend the house. Plus, they will also have plenty to eat. Paul eventually gives in, but asserts that he won't bring anyone here unless he's 100% sure they aren't sick. He recalls Bud experiencing symptoms in less than a day, so Paul decides to wait 3 days to be certain. Following this, he grabs some necessities and prepares his truck. He warns his family not to go outside, unless absolutely necessary, and if he doesn't return, they should not go looking for him. Paul then unties the intruder to help him take his family here and warns him that if he's lying, he'll kill him. The two get into a pickup truck, and the intruder rides in the back to keep an eye on their surroundings. After driving for a while, trouble arises when this happens. They are unexpectedly shot at by someone. The vehicle veers off the road, so Paul quickly grabs a gun and steps outside. He hides underneath the truck and notices a man in the distance. Paul fires several shots until the man collapses dead on the ground. He then walks out and discovers his partner beating up the other attacker. Paul immediately shoots the man to death, despite the intruder telling him not to. This results in a minor argument, and Paul wonders if he knew those men and planned the attack, but the intruder responds that he only wanted to keep the man alive to gain information if he was part of a larger group. Paul appears convinced by his words, and the intruder finally reveals that his name is Will. Paul then orders Will to wash his hands, and they steal the attacker's belongings before dumping their bodies in a ditch. The scene cuts to 3 days later, where Paul returns home with Will and his family, which includes his wife, Kim, and little son, Andrew. Sarah and Travis warmly greet them. Once inside, Paul establishes some ground rules to ensure that the virus doesn't enter their home. The rules include not going outside at night and locking the red door when everyone is inside the house. He also states that no one is allowed to go to the woods alone and that everyone must go in pairs for safety. But during this time, we notice Travis looking at Kim with interest. In the evening, Travis, as usual, goes to the attic and eavesdrops on the newcomers' conversations in their room. In the following days, the two families coexist peacefully, with each member doing their tasks and chores. Will is seen teaching Travis how to chop wood, while at home, Sarah teaches Kim how they purify water. After a long day at work, they spend the evenings together, eating and playing board games. Will and Kim frequently get intimate in their room, which Travis eavesdrops on and feels envious of. One night, he suddenly wakes up to find Kim in his room. She kisses him, but then unexpectedly pours black liquid into his mouth. Turns out it was another one of his nightmares. He then goes into the kitchen and finds Kim sitting there by herself. They sit down to talk, because neither of them can sleep. During their conversation, Kim begins talking about Will and mentions how she was a teenager when she met him. But this only makes Travis uncomfortable, so he bids her goodnight and leaves. The next day, while the men are working, Paul catches his son gazing at Kim in the distance. He figures out what's happening and warns Travis not to trust anyone other than his family. All of a sudden, Stanley begins barking aggressively at something in the woods. Paul tries to calm the dog, but it bites him before running off into the woods. Travis chases the dog, but soon loses sight of it, which leaves him frustrated. He continues to hear the barking sound, but it soon stops, and everything goes silent. His dad also arrives and scolds him for breaking the rules by running off alone. Travis is worried about Stanley, but Paul assures him that the dog knows its way home and will return soon. The scene then cuts to evening, where we see the two families silently having dinner in a tense atmosphere. We later see an upset Travis in his room, drawing eerie pictures while missing his dog. Paul tells him not to worry and that they will go look for Stanley first thing in the morning, which gives Travis some hope. Later, Paul and Will sit down in Bud's old room and begin drinking together. They discuss their lives prior to the apocalypse, and Will mentions that he used to live with his father and was an only child. This unsettles Paul, because Will had previously mentioned that he had lived at his brother's house before fleeing into the woods. But Will quickly clarifies that it was Kim's brother, and not his. Paul is still suspicious of the man, but he doesn't say much and leaves the room. Around midnight, Travis suddenly wakes up and hears some strange noises coming from the distance. He follows the sound and ends up in his grandpa's room, where Andrew was sleeping alone on the floor. Travis awakens the boy and takes him to his parents' bedroom. But then, moments later, he hears a distant banging noise and goes down the corridor to see what's going on. Travis finds the red door slightly open, which freaks him out. Suddenly, there's a loud crash, and a panicked Travis rushes to wake up his parents. Everyone wears a mask, and they arm themselves with weapons. And to their shock, They find a sick Stanley on the floor, wounded and moaning in pain. Travis is devastated and demands to see his dog, but his father refuses. Sarah then takes him to the living room, where he hears the gunshot and begins to cry. Later, Will and Paul are seen putting Stanley out of its misery and burning its body. Afterward, they discuss what must have happened to Stanley. They are shocked when Travis tells them how he discovered the red door unlocked. He claims that it was probably Andrew, whom he found asleep in his grandpa's room. But Andrew's parents don't believe this, as their son doesn't sleepwalk and isn't tall enough to open the locks. Travis is still confident about what he saw, and this soon leads to an argument between them. Amid the tension, Paul suggests that both families should quarantine themselves for a few days, as they don't know who might be sick. Everyone agrees and decides to pack enough food and water for the isolation period. Later, in the bedroom, Paul once again questions his son about the events of the night, and Travis insists he's telling the truth. However, he admits that he held Andrew without gloves when he brought him back to his parents' room. Travis worries that the kid might be sick and could have infected him. But his dad tells him not to panic and advises him to wash up in the meantime. Around midnight, Travis suddenly wakes up again and leaves the house with a lamp. He walks through the forest and hears Stanley barking in the distance. He follows the sound and finds a gun on the road, which he picks up. He then walks up a hill and watches in horror as Stanley is attacked by an unseen creature. Seconds later, Travis wakes up in his bed and begins vomiting black liquid. He freaks out when he notices his reincarnated grandpa standing right in front of him, with black liquid coming from his mouth. But it was all a nightmare, and Travis is relieved to see that he's not infected. Following this, Travis hears Andrew crying in the distance, so he heads to the attic. He overhears a conversation between Will and Kim, who seem panicked for some reason. It turns out the couple is planning to leave without the others knowing. Travis immediately wakes up his parents and informs them that he heard Andrew crying and that the family is planning to leave. He is worried that Andrew might be sick, which means he could be infected as well. Upon hearing this, Sarah and Paul load their weapons and wear protective masks to confront Will. They fear that the other family will steal their rations, and they cannot take that risk. Travis believes it's a little extreme and that they can share food, but Sarah argues that they can't trust these strangers to cooperate. She then asks her son to never leave the room until they come back. Later, we see an armed Paul and Sarah heading toward Will's family room. Sarah hides in the corner, while Paul demands to see Andrew, who's crying nonstop. Will refuses to let him in, but Paul insists that it's his house, and he has the right to check. After some insistence, Will finally opens the door. But then...
No, take your hand off the door. Take your hand.
He swiftly takes Paul's weapon. He then forces Paul to remove his mask, saying no one is sick here. Paul reluctantly agrees, and Will thanks him for everything his family has done for them. He claims that they simply want to take their share of food and water, and leave without any trouble. Next, Will and his family leave the room while taking Paul hostage at gunpoint. But as they climb down the stairs, Sarah points a gun at Will and demands that he hand over his weapon. Will again states that they just want to leave and are not seeking to hurt anyone. They both decide to lower their weapons, but Paul takes advantage of the opportunity to steal Will's gun and knocks him down. Meanwhile, Travis hears the commotion from his bedroom but decides to obey his parents and doesn't come out. Kim and Andrew reach the door, but Sarah corners them and asks them to stay still while Kim begs Sarah to let them go. On the other hand, Paul loads an unconscious Will in a wheelbarrow, and he takes the entire family outside. But then all of a sudden, Will brutally hits Paul's head with a rock, forcing Sarah to shoot him. Kim tries to run away with her son, so Paul shouts at them to stop, but they don't listen, so he is forced to shoot. Unfortunately, the bullet hits Andrew and kills him on the spot, devastating his poor mother. She begins to scream and begs to be put out of her misery. Paul obliges and finishes her off without hesitation, and Will also succumbs to his injuries. Meanwhile, Travis, who has just arrived, is traumatized by what just happened. But as he stares in shock, a fluid starts dripping from his nose, so he quickly runs to the bathroom and throws up. The scene then shifts to a few days later. where Travis, now visibly infected, lies in bed. He wakes up to find the same black patches on his skin that his grandfather had. Sarah, who is unmasked, assures him that everything will be fine and urges him to let go. Travis, on the verge of death, imagines himself wandering down the hallway and exiting through the red door at night. He soon passes away, and in the other room, Paul is seen weeping alone. In the final scene, Paul and Sarah sit at the table in silence, both mentally exhausted from what has happened. We notice they have also become infected and are waiting for the inevitable to come for them. Thus, we reach the end of this movie. Thanks for watching. If you like the movie, support us. Don't forget to subscribe for more movie recaps. See you in the next movie. Goodbye.